Hear that? That's now Crispy and McCrispy strips meeting Creamy Caesar sauce. Sounds extra crispy. Caesar sauce at McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This episode sponsored by Homebase. Homebase is built for small businesses trying to do it all. The neighborhood coffee shop, the local gym, the family-run restaurant. With Homebase, you can schedule your team, track time, run payroll, and manage hiring from one easy app. So you can spend less time chasing timesheets and more time running the business your customers love. More than 150,000 small businesses already use Homebase to keep their teams on track. Start free at joinhomebase.com. Homebase, built for small businesses that do it all.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's Golden Age, with a special emphasis on their lives behind the scenes. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be talking about Sir Laurence Olivier. This will be a two-part journey, but I will get the second part to you next week, I promise, so you don't have to wait very long. For this story, I used 4 different books for my research. I've been doing a lot of reading lately. The primary book I used was the biography titled simply Olivier, written by Terry Coleman. I also used the book Sir Larry, The Life of Laurence Olivier by Thomas Kiernan. The book Love Scene, The Story of Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh by Jesse Lasky Jr. and his wife, Pat Silver. And finally, the book Laurence Olivier, A Biography by Donald Spoto. Why so many books? Well, some of our stars intimidate me to cover a bit more than others, and Sir Laurence Olivier is one of them. He is a beloved figure in British theatre history, and there were a lot of complexities in his life at times. So, well, I was just a little nervous going into this journey. I don't want to mess it up. So, those who like to point out inconsistencies, just know that I have read 4 books on this topic, all which are considered the best biographies of his life. So I am going by what the true experts have told me through an incredible amount of their own research. So, without further ado, British listeners especially Dan, who is a stage actor in England today and suggested I cover Sir Laurence Olivier, this one is for you. Here is your king of the stage, dear British listeners, Sir Laurence Olivier. The date was May 22nd, 1907, at the family home on Wathen Road in Dorking, Surrey, where Laurence Kerr Olivier entered the world. Nobody knew it on that day, his first day of life, that he would someday bring extraordinary greatness to England and the entire world. Laurence Olivier was born to parents Reverend Gerard Olivier and Mother Agnes, and he completed the family by being the 3rd and final child. He had an older brother and an older sister. According to Sir Laurence Olivier's own account from what his father told him, Gerard was in the kitchen frying sausages when the doctor descended the stairs to present his newborn son to him. Not even cleaned up yet, as he had just been born, and immediately whisked away to show the father, as you do in 1907. Gerard held the baby briefly, but he was in the middle of something, making sausages. He quickly handed the newborn back to the doctor and continued frying his meat. The doctor urged him to visit his wife, which he really didn't want to do at that moment. But he did, gently stroked her forehead, and immediately returned to his sausages on the stove. Priorities. I tell you this story first because it's just a good story, but also to introduce to you this idea. Gerard Olivier was a storyteller. He could rarely be relied on for the truth, especially when it came to his own life story. And his last-born son, the son in this story, Laurence Olivier, was also a great storyteller, often embellishing facts. He grew up to be one of the greatest performing artists the world had ever seen, after all. And finally, Sir Laurence Olivier didn't hold much love or respect for his father. The story of his entrance into the world with a father too busy making sausages to care about it just highlights the fact that it was first told by a man who greatly embellished the truth and retold by another man who loved to embellish the truth and didn't care much for the original teller of the story, his father. It just helps us understand the father-son dynamic right from the start. And all I could think of was, man, I hope someone gave Agnes a sausage. I bet she was kind of hungry. Laurence Olivier may have disliked his father from a very young age, but all that extra love and admiration he had laying around went right into the arms of his mother. He absolutely adored his mother, and Agnes adored her little boy. By the time he was a toddler, Agnes decided her son would be referred to as Larry instead of Laurence. But he also had the family nickname of Kim. They all had nicknames. Gerard hated his son being called Larry, but Agnes didn't care. That was her little boy. To better understand the family dynamic and personalities, and how Laurence Olivier was influenced by each of his parents, I'm going to read you a quote from his longtime friend, Kenneth Tynan. He said, quote, "From everything I've learned about Larry, from him and others, he is the product of a fortuitous, almost ideal melding of two distinct, powerful genetic inheritances. The one is what I would call his exterior gifts, his voice, his physical aspect, his athleticism, his daring, his self-absorption, and his single-minded devotion to his work. All of which make for the compelling presence he has as an actor. These he clearly gets from his father. Yet had he possessed these alone, he would merely have been a competent actor. What served to ignite and transform all these traits into something unique were his interior gifts, which are what I believe he got from his mother. By these, I mean his perception, his instinctive intelligence, his intuition for the absolutely right gesture and movement, his ability to plumb character, his powers of observation and mimicry, his clearly feminine sensitivity and emotional expanse. Evidently, Larry's mother was a woman in whom all these traits powerfully reposed. I say reposed because, as a woman raised in Victorian times and married to a man of Larry's father's rather tyrannical temperament, she never had a chance to really exercise her gifts. In the end, the only way she expressed them was by passing them on to her son. He goes on to say, quote, "Parents don't directly produce geniuses. They merely create a field in whose soil a new human being grows. If they are lucky, the balance they impart to the soil through the combination of their own traits will produce the condition for genius to flourish. That's what Larry's mother and father did when they conceived him." End quote. Of course, as an early childhood educator, I have to say there is a lot more involved in guiding a child into an extraordinary life than this. But as far as the nature versus nurture question, these were the observations based on what he knew about his friend Laurence Olivier's nature, his genetic makeup. Agnes Olivier was described as cultured, warm-hearted, funny, high-spirited, and intelligent. Sadly, most of these traits were diminished as the years went on in her strict marriage, which laid on a foundation of rigid gender roles. While Gerard Olivier came from a background of clergymen, Agnes came from a family of educators. Joining the field of education was very important to her. And education was the field Gerard had decided to pursue in his adult life, not the church, which was expected of him. So Agnes was very happy about that. When the two married, they put their minds and ambitions together and opened their own school in Dorking. But it wasn't long before Gerard decided maybe education wasn't for him after all. As he put it, It was older souls to save, not young minds to develop, for which he was put on this earth. This decision was difficult for Agnes because of all the types of men she was to marry. She did not want to marry a clergyman. And here was her husband, who had seemed set on a life as an educator, becoming a preacher. She was expecting her second child when he made this decision. The reason Agnes felt this way was nothing negative against the church. What she worried about were the scrupulous rules and guidelines she feared would come along with the life of being a preacher's family. And that is exactly what happened for them. Gerard became very strict and cruel as he expected nothing but absolute perfection from his wife and children at all times. But it seems the rules didn't apply nearly as much for himself. He wasn't home much, but when he was, the air was tense. He was often filled with anger and had a violent temper. A storming, raging tornado, as described by Larry's older sister, Sybil. And it was Larry, the youngest child, the little mama's boy, who was the recipient of the worst of it, which, in turn, resulted in the behavior Gerard despised the most from his wife, Agnes. Overprotection of her child. She was constantly protecting her youngest child from his own father. And this only made the mother-son relationship closer, and the father-son relationship more strained. In 1910, when Larry was just 3 years old, Reverend Gerard Olivier moved his family from Surrey up a little north to Notting Hill in West London, which wasn't the best area in the early 20th century. 2 years after the move, Gerard's father passed away, leaving a considerable inheritance to him. Gerard had never been an overachiever in anything he attempted to do, and that included his devotion to the churches he headed, so his jobs often didn't last long. So between his inheritance and Agnes's family money, it kept the family from being poor and made sure the 3 children were all able to attend good schools. At 9 years old, Larry ended up a student at one of London's most prestigious schools, All Saints on Margaret Street, a small Church of England choir school that was specifically designed for sons of clergy. As a general education choir school, which boarded the boys as well, All Saints provided young Laurence Olivier with a rich musical education in the classics, like Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart. And he was also provided a rich academic education there, learning Latin and French in the process. It was at All Saints, performing with the choir and in school plays, where his theatrical foundation was first laid. Larry was doing well at All Saints. But then came the biggest kind of personal tragedy a child can endure when he was just 12 years old. His beloved mother died from a brain tumor. She was just 48 years old. Decades later, this is how Sir Laurence Olivier described the loss of his mother. Quote, "She was my entire world, and I cried just at first, but never again. I felt it appallingly deeply, but I bore it. I remember the priest said, 'Look, do you still want to sing your solo?' And I said yes. Of course, I thought it was Mother doing it with me, you see, so I sang like a bloody angel. Never sang so well before or since." End quote. Larry endured the devastating loss of his mother all within his own soul. He never showed his hurt, not until much, much later. And it was then, decades later, that he shared how he had really felt. He shared he was so distraught that he considered ending his life. He almost jumped off the Chelsea Bridge into the Thames. Larry's older sister, Sybil, who was 9 years his senior, briefly took over the role of mother. But within a year, she had entered drama school and gotten married. The family crumbled upon the death of Agnes, the loving glue that had been holding them all together the best she could. A year or so after his mother's tragic death, Laurence Olivier's father sent him to St. Edward's in Oxford, a boarding school also with the mission to prepare boys for a life of serving the church. Life was rigorous and difficult at St. Edward's, and the punishments were harsh. For breakfast each morning, the boys were served porridge and bread with margarine, and you know that porridge was bland and mushy. Lunch was their big meal, and for dinner they received just bread with margarine and tea. If the boys had their own money, they could spoil themselves with eggs or baked beans, both available in the school store. Larry continued performing in school plays, and his performances were receiving really positive reviews. One such play was the one production every young hopeful stage actor had to participate in, A Midsummer Night's Dream, in which Larry played Puck. He was clearly a natural on the stage, and Larry loved the sound of applause that came from his audiences. It was the best sound he could imagine since the day he lost the sound of his mother's voice. And his father actually seemed to have supported his son's desire to follow the stage, not the church, as he finished school at the age of 17. But he would not financially support his path at all. Larry was on his own there. Gerard Olivier had remarried, and his new wife really rallied for Larry to go into acting. He entered the Central School of Speech and Drama in London, ready to chase his dreams. When he succeeded at his audition for the program and receiving a much-needed scholarship along with his acceptance, the principal, Miss Fogarty, made sure to point out Larry's biggest flaw: his nose. His nose was his biggest imperfection, a big flaw, according to her. Something Laurence Olivier never forgot. What mattered most, though, was that he was a fine actor. He didn't care much for the languages or diction or theater history that were required in the program. But he trudged through it all in order to get to the bright and shining light he hoped was at the end of the tunnel for him. Once completed with his schooling, it is believed Laurence Olivier's first professional performance on the stage was in August of 1925, a play at a charity gala at the Brighton Hippodrome. And he fell flat on his face, literally. As he entered the stage, he tripped, flew through the air, and fell flat on his face. What a memorable entrance for a future king of the stage. Larry was just 18 years old, and he spent the next couple of years working hard to make a name for himself. He appeared in mostly small roles, and life on the road and the traveling productions was far from glamorous. But he was willing to put in the work to hopefully get where he wanted to be. In 1927, when he was 20 years old, he joined the Birmingham Repertory Theatre, which was a fantastic opportunity for his growth as an actor. By the following year, he was regularly playing lead parts. Regular listeners know that I don't focus very much on our stars' professional lives, unless there isn't much information available for me to share much about their personal lives. I am fascinated by human nature, and as an early childhood educator, I am even more fascinated on how early experiences shape us into the people we become. Our personalities, our outlook on life, our decisions, and our relationships. We've already talked about Laurence Olivier's early life, so now I'm going to step away from his acting career for the most part and talk about his life away from the stage, and later the screen. We'll cover the big moments, of course, but what I'm really here for is to tell you the stuff that maybe isn't so easily discovered, with the utmost respect to his legacy, of course. And lucky for us, he shared with the world a lot about his life. So let's pivot now to the life of Laurence Olivier off the stage. But we'll be checking back in on his career here and there too, because it all helped define his life as a whole. By the time Laurence Olivier was 22 years old, he was ready for a woman in his life. He had been known to be quite a flirt, but he was a reverend son and was raised under very strict religious beliefs regarding relationships. He was, of course, raised to not be intimate with a woman until he was married, and he really wanted to be intimate with a woman. I know, we see things that happen later in his life that shy away from following these religious guidelines. But as a young man, he tried his hardest to stay true to God in every way possible. I did read varying accounts on how much or little he engaged with both young women and men during his adolescence and young adulthood. I think the reality of it was that he often felt torn between the way he had always been told he should behave and how he wanted to behave. What matters here, when he was 22, was that he felt he was ready to become a husband and to not have to hide his intimate feelings. There was one actress who had been a constant in his life from the time that they went to Central School together, Peggy Ashcroft. There was another actress named Jean Welsh. Both were considerations for him, but neither became his bride. But it was another actress, Jill Esmond. Much later in his autobiography, long after his union with Jill Esmond was over, he admitted that he didn't find her dazzlingly attractive, but did think she would make a fine wife. He asked her, but she didn't give him an immediate answer. She was an actress and wasn't sure she wanted to settle down with a man, and she knew he was quite a flirt. Instead, she sailed to New York for production on Broadway. So he did the same. As fate had it, he was also offered a role on Broadway in a different show, so he boarded a ship and headed westward as well. Young Laurence Olivier loved New York. Jill did not love New York so much. But she did decide she loved Laurence Olivier. So they officially got engaged. But it would be a while before they could truly be together, because his show ended after a short run, but hers was wildly successful and went on an American tour after its long run on Broadway. So they were forced to have an ocean separating them for a while. Even when Jill returned, work kept them separated more than together. Their engagement was built mostly on letters and very expensive, long-distance telephone calls. Outside of his love life, Laurence Olivier had some things occurring within his family during his early years on the stage. His father had remarried and had another child, and his older sister Sybil was suffering from some kind of mental illness. She had tried herself to make it as a stage actress, but had a difficult time finding success. She decided to leave acting in the past, got married, and had a little girl. And then, one day, she had a breakdown. She was distraught and screamed in the night and was clearly in a very bad place. She declared she didn't want to be a mother anymore, or didn't think she could be a mother anymore, and she tried to give her daughter away to nuns. Larry wanted to help, but Jill Esmond urged him to stay out of the situation. She was afraid that Sybil's mental health struggles would in turn create mental health struggles for Larry. Jill was in Chicago at the time, so this was mostly communicated through letters. Of course, Larry did help his sister, and she ultimately ended up being admitted to a psychiatric hospital in London. It appears she received the help she needed and was able to return to her life in a much better place. In early 1930, 22-year-old Laurence Olivier appeared in his very first motion picture. It was a German film made in Berlin called The Temporary Widow, a crime thriller. Another followed a few months later, that one in London, titled Too Many Crooks. And then it was time to get married. Laurence Olivier and Jill Esmond were married by his father on July 25th, 1930. After the wedding, they made the long drive to a seaside cottage in Dorset, courtesy of Jill's mother. And then, when it was time for the long-awaited wedding night, things didn't go quite as well as either of them had hoped. Here is what Laurence Olivier wrote of the experience, or lack of experience, in his autobiography. I'm going to spare you the details of the actual act. Quote, "At last we turned away from each other. I remember going to sleep with a dazzlingly selfish sulk. My wife doesn't suit me. It really did look like a crass mistake. I had insisted on getting married from a pathetic mixture of religious and animal promptings. The indications were that my dreams of high sexuality were not to be realized, which was depressing and soon became oppressive. I was just not imaginative enough to find out what might be the key to Jill's responsiveness." End quote. In other words, things did not go well. They were not sexually compatible, according to him. But in Jill's defense, she was hospitalized months after their wedding for some pretty severe OBGYN issues that required surgery. Other than that, it sounds like their short honeymoon was beautiful. But Larry made sure to note on that other issue, both in his diary and later in his autobiography, because intimacy was something that was very important to him. Actor, playwright, and friend Noel Coward had offered Larry the role of Victor Prynne in his comedy play Private Lives shortly before the wedding. He hadn't been getting stage work as easily as he once did, so this was a kind of wedding gift from Noel to Larry, guaranteed work for him after the wedding. Rehearsals began immediately after Larry and Jill's short honeymoon, and within a few weeks it was on the road for a while before landing back on London's West End. So just like that, the newlyweds were once again separated. And they were preparing to be separated even longer, as Noel Coward had arranged for the play to appear on Broadway in New York. But then came Jill's lucky day. The actress who played opposite Larry in Private Lives became pregnant, so she had to drop out. So Jill Esmond was hired to take her place and join the production for its 3-month Broadway run. And what a time it was. There were parties every night after their performances, and they were able to rub elbows with the greats of New York society. They were both encouraged to do screen tests while in New York, and both were given offers to work in Hollywood. She with Fox, and he with RKO. The only problem was, neither of them really had any desire to work in Hollywood. But the money was just too good to turn down. So to Hollywood they went in the spring of 1931. The house they settled into in the Hollywood Hills was stunning, and the couple instantly fell into the life of a Hollywood super couple. They became good friends with Joan Crawford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and were having a blast. They spent days at the beach and nights at the Hollywood Bowl or dinner parties of famous Hollywood stars. They loved hosting lavish dinner parties themselves in their new home, complete with a staff. The Hollywood movie star life was much different than the London theater lifestyle they were accustomed to. They found there was never a dull moment in Hollywood society. Parties galore and constant juicy gossip and scandal. Laurence Olivier's first Hollywood film was called Friends and Lovers, with Lily Demita, Adolphe Menjou, and Erich von Stroheim. Jill only ended up appearing in supporting roles in 2 films, but Laurence Olivier was said to be on the track to be Hollywood's next big thing. However, as time went on, that wasn't panning out well either. With financial troubles looming over RKO due to both leadership and effects of the Great Depression, cuts were made, and Laurence Olivier was one of them. That is according to David O. Selznick, at least. Laurence Olivier said that it was his choice to leave the studio. There are also varying recollections of what was happening in Jill's hopeful Hollywood career at this time. Laurence Olivier said that she was in top consideration for the lead role in A Bill of Divorcement, the role that ultimately went to Katharine Hepburn, a strange little creature with an absolutely awful voice, as Olivier referred to her. Selznick denied this. Jill hadn't originally been too keen on going to Hollywood, but they were there now, and she wanted to give it a little more time. She wanted to stay. But Larry was through with it. He wanted to go home, so he suggested they separate. She stay in Hollywood, he return to England. Nope, she wasn't going to do that. That would not be good for their marriage. They returned to England together after 2 years in Hollywood. Now used to that more luxurious life, the Oliviers made a new home for themselves on London's Chelsea Embankment overlooking the Thames. The door leading into their home was made of bronze, and the home had 25-foot-high windows, dressed with white silk curtains against the subtle blue walls. Everything about the home was lavish and beautiful, even Larry and Jill's bedroom, boasting a 7-foot-wide bed. And just as they were finally able to sit down in their perfectly decorated home, Laurence Olivier was beckoned back to Hollywood. MGM wanted him to play opposite the finest actress in Hollywood in her next film, Greta Garbo in Queen Christina. Actually, it was the Queen of Hollywood herself who requested him, so he took the long voyage back again from London to Los Angeles. Did the principal photography, was fitted for wardrobe, all those nitty-gritty pre-production details. Filming was just beginning when it became apparent Greta Garbo did not care for her English co-star. Here is a recounting of what happened according to a witness who was on the set. Quote, Olivier gave her the old British charm. He turned it on till it gushed out of his pores. No response from Garbo. Then he dazzled her with English wit, the Noel Coward stuff, epigrams popping all over the place. No response. Then the He-Man approach, big swear words, swagger. From G, nothing. Then he tried the pathetic angle, put his finger in his mouth and pouted, pathetic as hell. At the pathetic approach, Greta finally arose from her seat, looked up at Olivier tragically and said, "Life is a pain," and walked away. From which Olivier deduced that he was through, and he wasn't wrong. End quote. Chemistry was crucial to Greta Garbo, and she felt none with Laurence Olivier. The next day, he was told they had decided to go another direction, and that direction was Greta Garbo's former great love, John Gilbert. I'm going to slip away for a moment here while I share a couple of quick ads with you. Gotta keep those lights on here at Stars of the Golden Age. Thanks for indulging me, and we'll be right back after this.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.
Welcome back. After Greta Garbo shooed him off the set of Queen Christina in late 1933, 26-year-old Laurence Olivier once again returned to England and vowed to devote himself to his art on the stage. 2 years later, he was offered a role that signaled big changes in his life, both professionally and personally. Professionally because, well, it's Romeo and Juliet. It was a huge milestone in Laurence Olivier's career as a Shakespearean actor, and it became the longest-running production of Romeo and Juliet since it had been written in the 1590s. This period signaled change personally because the actress who was cast as Juliet was Peggy Ashcroft. Remember her? They had known each other closely since their school days, and Larry had potentially considered Peggy for a wife. Now they were paired up together in one of the most tragic love stories ever written. It is not known for certain, but it is highly speculated, especially by Jill, that Larry and Peggy had an affair during the run of Romeo and Juliet. The first big hiccup in his marriage, as far as we know. But a much larger betrayal to his wedding vows was right around the corner. You know who I'm talking about. Laurence Olivier first met Vivien Leigh in the lobby of the Savoy Grill in the winter of 1935, while they were both dining with their respective spouses. Vivien had seen Olivier performing the year before, and he had seen her on stage as well. Both were impressed and smitten. In his recounting of seeing her performance in The Mask of Virtue, he used words like wondrous, magical, poised, beautiful, fragile, an attraction of the most perturbing nature I had ever encountered. Soon after that first meeting, Vivien and her husband Lee Holman were frequent dinner companions of Larry and Jill, who, by the way, were expecting a baby. So they were close couple friends, having a grand time. But Larry and Vivien were having their own private soirees too. The attraction and electricity between them was undeniable. Vivien had already been stepping out on her marriage. She had never really been happy in her union with Lee Holman. Larry may or may not have had an affair or two in his past. But this was a big one. This was sexual and emotional, and everything in between. This was monumental in his marriage to Jill Esmond. Before we move on to what happens next in the story of Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, I feel I do have to tell you that there is some evidence in his own writings that there was intimacy or at least feelings for other men at times in his life. The first was when he was a teenage boy when he was in the all-boys school. It was said that this was not uncommon as the boys worked through their developing sexuality. Many then believed that Laurence Olivier had a fling with fellow actors Noel Coward or Henry Ainley. There were letters from Henry Ainley to Laurence Olivier that Olivier kept, and some are very sexually explicit. A portion of a few of them were shared in Terry Coleman's biography, and in them, he wrote of his desire to run his fingers through Larry's hair and how he tossed and turned at night thinking of him. Laurence Olivier did touch on this subject in his 1982 book, Confessions of an Actor. In the manner of writing he was so gifted with, he was very suggestive, yet very vague in the way he spoke about it. Did he write about it in his book because of the decades-long rumors, or because it was something that he felt was important to his story? Of course, today, who a person loves doesn't raise an eyebrow, or it shouldn't at least. But we have to remember the social ideals were much different in the 1920s and 1930s, and still in the early 1980s when he wrote his book, especially considering his strict religious upbringing. From what I gathered, Laurence Olivier was a deeply passionate individual, and he simply didn't see the stark gender boundary lines most everyone else did when it came to expressing that passion. He was torn between his religious upbringing and what society deemed quote-unquote normal against what his soul felt. Here is a portion of what he wrote regarding this subject. Quote, "Perhaps there existed in my subconscious a strong suspicion that that element was all my fault. In the study of humanity, I don't believe there can be found anything conclusively definite. There must, I am satisfied there must always be, no matter how faintly drawn, a question mark attached to any found solution regarding human behavior." End quote. We are who we are, and all of our stories are unique. Love can be felt and expressed in countless ways, and Laurence Olivier lived this way. That deep, passionate man that was Laurence Olivier had hoped he could express that love and desire upon his wife. But he realized he needed something else, something more. I do believe he and Jill had many good moments. Their marriage held a lot of good. They grew together as artists. They welcomed life into the world when they became parents to their son, Simon Tarquin, who they called Tark, in August of 1936. But unfortunately, that happy moment was overshadowed by Larry's intense love affair with Vivien Leigh. In fact, that night Larry and Vivien first met at the restaurant, Larry and Jill were there because they were celebrating the news of her pregnancy. The affair began soon later, and at the christening of Tark, I've read 2 different accounts of this, but in Hugo Vickers' biography of Vivien Leigh, he wrote that Larry arrived to the christening with Vivien Leigh on his arm. But in Terry Coleman's biography of Laurence Olivier, he stated that Larry showed up with the scent of Vivien's perfume on him. Either way, the affair was definitely in full ardent effect by the time of baby Tark's christening, and the would-be happy little family was descending into its final moments. And according to the letters from Henry Ainley, he and Olivier had something romantic occurring during that same period too, late 1936 to early 1937. It was Vivien Leigh who Laurence Olivier truly couldn't get enough of, though. And she felt exactly the same way. They appeared in their first movie together in the summer of 1936, Fire Over England, and their affair was in full swing by that point. It was almost a year later, almost a year of not so discreetly sneaking around right under their spouses' noses, that Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh decided to come clean, to sever their marriages, to walk away from their spouses and their children, and to start a new life together. They simply couldn't live without one another. Vivien told her husband Leigh in early June 1937. The next day, Larry told Jill. Neither was willing to grant a divorce. A year into Larry and Vivien's new life together, the one they had out in the open, Larry was asked to take the lead role of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, a film in Hollywood with Samuel Goldwyn Studio. Vivien was offered a role too, but she was not interested because what they offered her was the supporting role of Isabel, not the lead female role of Kathy. It was Kathy or nothing, so she took nothing. Olivier wasn't very interested in returning to Hollywood again. But director William Wyler was very persistent, and in the end, the offer was just too good to refuse. So back to Hollywood he went, sailing from Southampton on the SS Normandy on November 5th, 1938, Vivien Leigh's 25th birthday. With him, he brought a copy of Emily Bronte's novel that he would be bringing to life on the silver screen. He had never read it, but he lost the book 3 days into the sailing. He picked up a new copy once he arrived in New York and read it on his journey across the United States. He may have lost his first copy of Wuthering Heights because he was busy partying it up and constantly changing cabins during the voyage. He would change cabins once he discovered something in it that Vivien wouldn't like having only a shower and not a bathtub, even though she was not on the ship with him. He insisted on having a cabin on the starboard side of the ship so he could be closer to her. He wrote to Vivien, adding to his letter each day of the 5-day crossing with intentions of mailing it once in New York. It was 32 pages long. He called her ship to shore every single day, which cost a fortune. These two were absolutely addicted to each other. Noel Coward and Leslie Howard were on the Normandy as well for that crossing, and cocktails were a-flying. Olivier wrote that on the second day aboard, he had 3 vodkas and 4 champagne cocktails before lunch, followed by more champagne after lunch. So now you can understand how he lost that copy of Wuthering Heights. Once settled back in Hollywood at the Beverly Hills Hotel, things did not start off very well on the Wuthering Heights film set. Laurence Olivier and William Wyler butted heads bad. They were not getting along and they were not seeing eye to eye on anything. Laurence Olivier, by this time, had established himself as a great Shakespearean theater actor. What he had thought about Hollywood from his 2 years there previously had soured even more. He looked down on filmmaking as a medium and was openly patronizing to the whole process of movie acting. Still, William Wyler knew he was who he needed in that role. So he leveled with him. He invited him to his home, and he was straight with him. Yes, I understand you look down on film acting. I'm paraphrasing here. But if you are such a great actor, you can act in any role on film. because it is film that is the greatest medium ever invented. Olivier didn't start off well with producer Sam Goldwyn either, or his leading lady Merle Oberon, whom he had worked with before but felt differently now. It was an all-over negative experience for pretty much everyone involved. Laurence Olivier recalled one moment of filming a scene with Merle Oberon. Daggers were drawn, we spat at each other, we hated each other, and after one appalling row in which we were both trembling and tears were streaming down, and we were absolutely trembling with rage, Willie said, "Roll them!" And it was the most heavy-making love scene we'd done, and we did it hating each other. But it was one of the top love scenes in the film, as it turned out. That was Willie, very bright and clever, end quote. Although not the smoothest film production, the movie turned out to be a masterpiece. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including a Best Actor nomination for Laurence Olivier, and took home 1 statue for Best Black and White Cinematography. This was the same Academy Award ceremony that celebrated Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Goodbye Mr. Chips, Stagecoach, Ninotchka, The Wizard of Oz, and Gone with the Wind. 1939 is often referred to as the greatest year in cinema history, and Wuthering Heights is one of the reasons why. And it made English Shakespearean theater star Laurence Olivier into a Hollywood movie star. Gone with the Wind, one of those masterpieces from 1939. And we all know who so perfectly portrayed Scarlett O'Hara, right? Miss Vivien Leigh. When Laurence Olivier had made the journey from England to the US in late 1938, he did it alone. But it wasn't long before his love, Vivien Leigh, had followed him on her own journey, sailing from Southampton on the Queen Mary on November 27, 1938, about 3 weeks after Larry. Yes, she missed him terribly, but that wasn't her sole or even primary purpose for making the long trip from London to Los Angeles. She, along with much of the world, had become enraptured by Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind. And like every young white actress in the world, she had become obsessed with securing the role of Scarlett O'Hara in the film version that was in the works from David O. Selznick. Absolutely obsessed. The second she learned the film was being planned, she began telling everyone she knew that she was going to be Scarlett O'Hara, a British woman playing a Southern belle. Nobody believed she could do it, but she fully believed that she could do it. So off she went to Hollywood to plead her case to David O. Selznick himself. I talk more about this in my Vivien Leigh episode, so please check that out if you want to hear more of her story. The revisited version I did not that long ago, not the original. Her story was my very first episode of this podcast, and it is rough. But I redid it not too long ago, so please check it out. Today, we are here to discuss Laurence Olivier's story, but I just needed to mention this part of Vivien Leigh's story, because it is arguably the most important part of her story, and in the story of Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier as a couple. Because with those 2 film masterpieces they carried in 1939, they became instant Hollywood royalty, even though they were both still legally married to other people. Their Hollywood time together was short-lived, though, because as she continued the long and grueling filming of Gone with the Wind, Larry took on a play in New York, No Time for Comedy, opposite the great Katharine Cornell. The separation brought more devastation to them both, mostly to Vivien. I read many excerpts from their numerous love letters, mostly his, and they were intense, a bit too nauseatingly obsessive for my liking, and oftentimes pretty spicy. Vivien couldn't wait to be done with Gone with the Wind, and that day finally came for her at the end of June 1939. At which time she immediately flew to New York to be reunited with Larry. In the meantime, both of them had pleaded through correspondence for divorces from their respective spouses, Lee and Jill. They wanted to move on with their lives together so badly. After their time in New York, once back in Hollywood together, Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh wanted absolutely nothing to part them, including work. They wanted to join film projects as a package deal. They thought every movie either of them was offered should have the other cast to play opposite. Laurence Olivier fought for Vivien Leigh to play his leading lady in Rebecca. Joan Fontaine got the role. He wanted her to play opposite him in Pride and Prejudice. Greer Garson did. She tried to get him in Waterloo Bridge. It went to Robert Taylor. These casting decisions were not accepted well by Larry and Vivien. To showcase them as a dynamic team properly, Laurence Olivier set out to produce a stage production of Romeo and Juliet for he and Vivien to carry together. He became obsessed with it and was reportedly quite bored at that iconic Academy Awards ceremony in 1940 that celebrated the best year in cinema history and awarded Vivien an Oscar, and where Hattie McDaniel made history. Well, he didn't care about any of it because all he could think about was his production of Romeo and Juliet. He was all consumed with making it a masterpiece of the stage, with the two of them bringing the story to life better than anybody ever had. But when it came time to deliver, it didn't go as well as Larry had hoped and dreamed for. The production opened at the Geary Theater in San Francisco on April 18, 1940. And in attendance that opening night were Olivia de Havilland and her date, Jimmy Stewart, Leland Hayward, Margaret Sullivan, and many more prominent figures who made the trip from Los Angeles for the big night. A lot was riding on this production. It had cost $60,000 to create, which would be $1.4 million today. They had to be a success, which they sadly weren't. After performances in San Francisco and Chicago, the production landed in New York's 51st Street Theater. The publicity was grand, announcing the great lovers in person, or advertisements saying things like, "See real lovers make love in person." Surely the huge fame Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh held in the film world and the English stage world would transfer over to the Broadway success of their own passion project. There were hiccups in their opening night performance, and many believed it lacked the adequate feelings and passion required of the characters. At the opening night party, Hollywood producer Sam Goldwyn, the G in MGM, received his glass of champagne from Vivien and said to the couple, "Well, you're still Olivier, and you're still beautiful, Vivien. I think you should quit all this Shakespeare baloney and make another picture for me." Critics wrote things like, "The worst Romeo ever," and "The audience remained quiet, they were fast asleep," or "Much scenery, no play." Time magazine printed a large review. Here's a section of it, just to give you an idea of what the reception was like. Quote, "Last week, one of the most glittering first-night audiences in Manhattan's history saw a production of Romeo and Juliet that was not merely weak or spotty, but calamitous. They saw a Juliet who looked like a poem, but had no sense of poetry. A Romeo who made a handsome lover, but talked as though he was brushing his teeth. They saw fear and grief portrayed by belly writhings and animal howls. They saw Olivier, in the first balcony scene, rush around like a dazed fireman trying to save a trapped maiden from the flames. The poetry that lifts the story to the level of tragic romance was simply not there. In spite of being the more Shakespeareanist actor of the two, Olivier was far worse than Miss Leigh. But his greatest sin was not in his acting, but his directing. He got off on the wrong foot by using a virtually uncut version of the play. This mistake he tried to remedy by having the cast race through some of their lines, swallow others. Whatever virtues the production had were purely pictorial, for the comedy scenes missed fire, and the romantic scenes lacked it." End quote. Words like uninspired and hollow were used in critic reviews all over. Some audience goers were so bold as to want their money back. It was a giant flop. Although Laurence Olivier's big production of Romeo and Juliet did not go well, he and Vivien Leigh were still seen as huge stars in a Hollywood light. But most importantly, things were finally going their way in their personal lives. They were finally both granted divorces from their spouses in February of 1940. Both Lee Holman and Jill Esmond were granted custody of their children. Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh could finally live freely together without prejudice, and they could finally get married if they chose to, which they did on August 31st, 1940, 1 minute after midnight, with Olivier's good friend Garson Kanin as a witness, alongside his romantic partner of the time, Katharine Hepburn, that strange little creature with an absolutely awful voice, who was not happy about the late-night occasion since she had to work on a film in the morning. Finally, at last, Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh, the great lovers, were united in marriage. This is where I'm going to leave off today, but I promise I'll be back in 1 week with the conclusion of Laurence Olivier's story for you. We still have a lot to talk about. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to Dan for the push to talk about Sir Laurence Olivier and for supporting the show. I will see you all next week. Don't forget, reach for the positive in every day, be kind to everyone you encounter, and have a great rest of your week. For this episode, I used the following books: Olivier by Terry Coleman, Sir Larry, The Life of Laurence Olivier by Thomas Kiernan, Love Scene, The Story of Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh by Jesse L. Lasky Jr. and Pat Silver, and Laurence Olivier, A Biography by Donald Spoto. I also used timeline information from vivandlarry.com and IMDB.
Most people don't realize how much their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions, pulling details about you from public records and the internet, and then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. It's why you get endless robocalls and why ads seem to follow you everywhere. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance, all backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might sell just credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of it, together, at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/remove. Protect yourself now at aura.com/remove.